Sybil?
Here.
Candy?
Here.
Amanda?
Here. Here.
You're having a banana?
Jacqueline, how does this happen?
So this morning I tried to do very interesting discussions, and interesting discussions are always bad because it's the morning class. So I'm going to try to do it again. I think I told you that
Your morning class was lit that.
there what?
Apparently it was lit. Your morning class loved your class discussion.
Seriously?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I was literally talking to multiple people about how much fun they had. Like, yeah, it was the most fun I ever had in first month.
If you had walked in, you wouldn't know it. Actually, yeah. No, they're always like that. At some point, my jokes about the zombie apocalypse, like, they weren't funny the first time. They weren't funny like the 12th time. I just stopped making them. I had decided that actually I would write when the zombie apocalypse had actually come. Which one? I don't know. It only affected the 24 students in that room, in this room. So here's what I need to explain. It starts like this. This class, as you know, used to be 2 semesters long. Yes. And when it was 2 semesters long, well, everything was miserable. It was like, I love one semester.
Wait, was it like double the papers or the same amount of papers and that double the amount of time?
No, it was over the course of 2 semesters it was 7 total papers. Right? Now it's just 3.
Oh, okay.
But by the time you got to spring, you were actually do a research paper, and that was no research paper. But by the spring, you're capable of doing a research paper. It's not, it shouldn't be a challenge. Right? No. Well, but you've only done 2 papers for me.
Maybe a few years.
Going into a third. Right?
I already finished it.
Anyway, it was 2 semesters, and we had to make a bunch of changes. And one of those, obviously, you've seen, we're kind of focusing on the Constitution and these kind of big structures of government. And then the other thing that happened was you have to cut out a bunch of content. So the course becomes very, Wait, October, how did you do that?
I didn't do anything.
Why did it take me so much? Wow. She used the force. Did you see that?
Reenact it.
Spontaneously.
Wow.
Was it carry you?
Show me how to do that.
Why do you want this power?
What?
How is something?
He caught my head.
So I have to make all these cuts, right? So the class becomes a little streamlined. We bring it to a focus, but we lose a bunch of stuff. So among the other things, we're not talking about World War I, World War II, Cold War. All that's gone. Even at this point, civil rights. Not really much time. We can either do that or we can do something else. And what had happened in the last 3 semesters was Skinner and I were trying to cram in way too much stuff at the very end. Like we tried last semester, I thought I had finally got it down, right? And it was clear I didn't get it down. I had a bunch of information, but we had a kind of unifying theme, and I thought, well, put it out there, we'll just kind of make some connections, everything. It doesn't work that way, because we need time, which we don't have out of my second semester. So Skinner and I decided we were going to try this. Right? We're going to talk about one particular theme, and we're going to give you some things to do and that will kind of pull it together and give cohesion to like one thing instead of having a big overarching thing with lots of information. So this is what we're going to try. It begins actually with a question about cars, actually.
Wait, like the movie?
Do Car 3 June?
Actually, as it turns out, once again, Josh.
Yes.
Okay. Your attempt to derail me, in fact, has already been figured into the discussion. And in fact, the Cars movie does show up in this particular discussion.
See, I'm not derailing, I'm progressing the conversation.
But the rail part is actually appropriate to our conversation too. Because derail comes from
Railgun.
knocking off the rails, and in fact, rails are actually the center of our discussion today. So,
You're welcome.
cars and rails. Okay. So,
Train car.
train cars. Well, it's kind of about train cars. Remind me, the earlier conversation we had, we talked about the environment a couple times. So we had, for instance, the CCC. Who had the CCC the other day? Okay, so what was the main thing that characterized the CCC?
Let people have jobs and
Okay, but what did they do?
Oh, they environment, they cut down trees and make environmental changes to the grass.
They were planting lots of trees.
Yeah.
Okay. They were planting
Public
lots
works
of trees.
project.
What's that?
Public works project.
Public works projects, although in this case, usually we think of public works as like people working on roads or something like that. In this case, it's trees enforced. Are you pretending that you're not here? I do see you.
What'd he say?
You can't see you. You can't see me.
So you're trying to pretend that I'm not here.
No. I was whispering to him. I wanted to make sure he didn't know that I was talking.
If we back up a little further, so we had the CCC and its trees, and then so that's Franklin Roosevelt, right? This is Franklin Roosevelt, the guy who's been a younger progressive back in the 1910s. Then there was his cousin, the president, Teddy Roosevelt. What did he do with regards to the environment? We had that conversation too. You know, he set up national parks, and he has a particular impulse to do this, right? He thinks the natural environment is something worth saving. He really enjoys being in the outdoors, even if it means watching 500 cattle die. And what's that? They froze to death. And so, but he wants to promote these kinds of activities. And we also saw that conservation and preservation are not necessarily the same thing. Like one is, preservation is more like the abolitionist position, and conservation is more like the anti-slavery position, right? To go more flexible. And then we talked about, I mentioned that, with situations that underneath Roosevelt National Park, now we have this big oil reserve. And conservation should say that it's okay to go after that. So we're not going to talk about the Cold War, and we're not going to talk about World War II, but Cold War, you do know I'm talking about the United States, Soviet Union, this kind of contest. Yes?
I don't know. Wasn't it like the most interesting war in the U.S. ever been?
Well, it wasn't. The thing is, the two sides never actually fight each other, hence Cold War, right? They're never actually fighting directly against each other. But there's an arms race, space race. There are attempts to support other governments who will do some fighting, so you have these proxy wars and so on. We're not really going to talk about those.
Who would have won?
What I am going to mention, though, is that coming out of World War II, so this Cold War emerges, and President Eisenhower is a guy who was actually quite practical. He was a military man by training. He spent his whole life in the military. When he decides to run for president, he chooses the party that he was sure is going to win that year, not because he was really beholden to the Republicans, but he was sure that the Democrats had been in power long enough that he would win if he ran as a Republican. Very centrist guy. He also had a fear of trains. You know how some people don't like flying?
I like flying.
Well,
I don't like walking.
you don't like you need to make a lot of money so you can get someone to push you around in a chair.
Oh, I was thinking a shopping cart.
He
I'm thinking of break.
he had this fear of trains, and he had this fear of trains because he was worried that they would be blown up by the Russians.
Well, that was
This is about as rational as believing that your plane is going to blow up by just being on. Right? I mean, your chances of actually having your plane go down are so incredibly small. Right? So it's a completely irrational fear that he had. So he didn't like trains. The other part, though, is that Eisenhower is going to get the idea. He got the idea that the country really needed to be prepared for a Russian invasion. And so the country needed to be prepared to move military equipment across the country really fast.
So they built a highway because they come from Germany.
So you build a highway system.
With checkpoints, and then you monitor.
And bypassing it.
The interstate highway system, right? It is. It's the very first stretch of highway built in the United States was in New Jersey. Actually, and if you, this is outside, this is past St. Louis, but if you ever drive down Interstate 70, this sign is there. Not that exact, it's not the exact one, it's, they actually tell you this is the first stretch of highway that was actually taken.
Can't you land like a really big plane on the highway?
Well, that's the added bonus. Not only can you move here, but if you want to land planes, you can do that too. So there are all kinds of advantages. Yes?
So the only reason why we did this is because Eisenhower was
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say that's the only reason. They want to move the military equipment. That's the best way to do it, right? You can move everything much faster this way.
More than that.
The thing about, well, okay, this is that's a good point, and it does raise a big question. The thing about the highways is that it's what, as Alex pointed out, it's what the Germans had done. They had the Autobahn, they had a highway system, they moved all of the equipment around that way. They had the trains, but they were reserving that for, killing off a 1/3 of the world's population. And so the highways become the way in which you don't have to unload or load anything. You just make it mobile and you can move it around very quickly. I mean, there are advantages to using the highway. There's trains, we have to move everything out and load everything off. Roads, you just move everything around. Everything is already mobile. But I'm going to come back to your question because even if we don't necessarily want to go there about the military equipment, it does raise some questions about if it aren't trains faster, and the short of the answer is yes. In fact, they are faster in many ways. But they decide to build these highways. How were people getting around before we had the interstate highway system?
Dirt roads.
Walking. Well, okay. Let me ask this. Hold on a second. How many of you are from a town that has an actual old downtown? I mean, like a pre-1930s.
Wait, is Springfield old?
Are you from Springfield?
Yeah.
Okay, Springfield.
Lockport.
Yes, that has an old downtown because of the I&M Canal. Quincy because of the river.
it's small town near the town called Waterland, and like the middle school is built in like the early 1900s.
Is that the downtown?
It's like, I'm like part of the downtown. Springfield.
Springfield. Okay. So if you're from a really old town, you'll have this old downtown. How many of you are from a place that doesn't have an old downtown? Where are you from?
Evergreen Park,
Okay, that would work.
Buffalo Grove.
Buffalo Grove.
Concord.
Okay, what do all those places have in common versus the other ones in the first part of the list?
There are a lot of white people there.
Huh? What did you say? Huh?
Suburbs.
Yeah, yes, they are all suburbs, but suburbs themselves are not a new concept.
Built by the progressives.
Well, I was
new
actually
buildings.
going to get us back towards what Tommy said, which is
Highways.
I'm going to get to the interstate part. What they all have in common is that the reason they don't have old downtowns is because they were constructed after the automobile became the main source of transportation that everyone was using. All of your old downtowns, chances are, if you're in you can know the age of your downtown by the fact that it has a railroad that goes through the center of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have a railroad that goes through the center of it, you know you have an old downtown. Or, in the case of Lockport, a canal. Because if it wasn't for the I&M Canal,
Lincoln stopped by.
What?
That's what made us famous.
is that true?
Lincoln.
Yeah.
Lincoln. No, but he went to our town once, and that's why he was famous.
Yeah.
He had his house in our downtown.
He went there. He went.
Downtown Aurora is both old and it has a train. If you
And it has a river.
no, if you ever have the chance, or if you're from Aurora, if you ever have a chance to go, Aurora has a historical society somewhere. I know that I've seen the pictures at the library.
Are you part of it?
If you look at pictures of Aurora in the 19th century, it doesn't even seem like it's the same town you're in today. I mean, Aurora in the 19th century looks like Chicago. It's so bustling and so busy. And how many of you have been to the Trolley Museum?
Like the candy?
Are you from anyone from Elgin, South Elgin?
No, but I know.
Okay. Here, this is bonus. Didn't get this in the morning class. We have Elgin. This is the Fox Valley, right? You have Elgin. You have South Elgin, St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia, North Aurora, Aurora. Way over here somewhere, we have Chicago, right?
It's all right. Close enough. Close enough to town.
There used to be an Elgin, Aurora, Chicago train line. And I asked if anyone's from South Elgin, because if you go to South Elgin today, there's a stretch of the track that goes for about 2 miles. You can actually still ride on the electric train. You used to be able to go Elgin to Aurora, right? If you were a commuter, that train ran all the way along the Fox River. You can go all the way down, and then you can get the train that takes you into the city. In the case of Aurora, the train is still there. In the case of Elgin, the train is still there. Actually, in the case of Geneva, the train is still there as well. But this train doesn't exist anymore, except for this one stretch, which they have now turned into the Trolley Museum. That's why I brought it up. Why what?
Yeah, why'd they tear up the track?
That is the source of our question. Why did they tear up the track? So I know I saw statistics recently. Your generation is has a higher proportion of people without driver's licenses than any generation since cars became ubiquitous.
Because we're lazy.
This week, I'm giving my life.
Uber.
This week, I'm moving just like this week. I've had that for close to a year.
Well, they can be useful. You can start to be an Uber driver with a license.
I see what Lawrence
He's a taxi cab driver. He's a taxi.
But here's the other thing. Apparently, your generation has another trend that goes with not having a driver's license, which is kind of preferred places that you want to live.
Your parents' basement.
It worked.
Require like anything for you.
Why do you think we're gonna have driver's license?
Downtown.
My mom drives everywhere.
California.
When we had the recent recession, the one in 2008, there was one kind of one choice of housing type, geographically speaking, where the values didn't drop. I mean, there were parts of the country where housing dropped by like half its value.
Was it condos?
That was the same first guess as this morning, and I'll give you the same answer, which is, well, condos doesn't entirely answer the question.
Condominiums.
It still doesn't answer the question. It doesn't matter whether it's a condo or a house in this case.
Okay.
It depends on where it's found.
In the middle of nowhere, land prices didn't drop. Like cornfields.
No, it turns out that it's not there.
And reservations.
Reservations.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the land is so cheap already. No, not there either.
Settle, the homestead.
Homestead,
Because they're free.
because they're
Still
free. In that respect, you're probably correct, but it's a homestead, there's nothing on it.
Yeah.
So, no, that's not
There's
actually
land.
right. Any other guesses?
In big cities.
Trump Tower.
Apartment.
Studio.
Like houses that are like close to like transportation.
It turns out, yes, my first question answers the second question. Are you the one who said that? You need to speak louder. So it turns out, if you housing that was right near a train station, where people could get on the public transportation, they had no problem at all during the recession. They were more likely to hold on to their value than anyone else. For the simple reason that
No one wants to live there.
no, your generation doesn't have driver's licenses, and the people who are developing property, and the young people most likely to get jobs, wanted housing near public transportation. After all, they don't have driver's licenses; they have to get a housing.
Oh, so everyone wants it.
Your statistic,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you're part of the demographic anyway.
I walked the transition, downtown station. I walked the transition to the flyway.
No, exactly.
I'm one.
Yeah, you're one of them. And if you never did a driver's license, then
This weekend.
you are totally a type.
This weekend, I'm gonna get my license, I'm coming on Monday.
Then you're no longer that statistic. You've escaped that
That's what I'm saying, just to prove to you. Monday, I'm in my license. Yeah.
It's fine, Thomas, now you can hold on. Shh. So the whole landscape of this country, what you're telling me is that we have suburbs where some of you live now, which would not actually exist if not for the automobile. At the same time, there is this demand on the part of your generation for public transportation. The only problem is, I just told you, there are whole train lines that don't even exist anymore. Most of this now.
What did they do with the metal? Melt it down?
No.
They made lampposts for that.
They made the museum out of it.
No. Well, just that stretch. The rest of it's bike trail.
Oh, really? They just like.
Did you ever wonder where all of our bike trails came from?
We have trails.
Where do we get bike trails?
Train track?
They all used to be train tracks.
Really?
They-
Even the ones that go in little circles?
You can actually go from.
Is that the, why is there's a big bike track that runs along the train line?
You can go from Oak Park all the way to Geneva, and then up this way, and end up in Madison, Wisconsin.
Ew, I don't like that.
I like Madison. Anyway, you can do that all by bicycle on the bike trails. It's all connected. And a vast majority of that was, at one point, railroad. So, what in the world happened? Is this just because Eisenhower didn't like light? How do we end up with car culture? How do we end up with no train, train tracks that are pulled up? And at the same time, a whole generation that, doesn't even want a license and would rather just hop on the train.
Did it like the car prices?
Well, yeah, from mass production, so they made it cheap.
So in the 1920s, we started getting cars, but they're still for the wealthy. Although Ford decides he wants to bring down the price. He wants his own workers to be able to afford his cars.
He made the assembly line.
Ford. Everything gets completely messed up with the Great Depression, however. Right? Great Depression puts a damper on all of these ambitions. But then coming out of World War II, I showed you in the graph, unemployment drops down to basically full employment, almost no unemployment during the war. And coming out of the war, there is this recovery. The United States is untouched by conflict. I mean, you don't have battlefields in the U.S. during World War II. Other countries do. And so the U.S. loans out a bunch of money and is in this great position, and it's a really good time.
Why did we forgive the loan? Why did we forgive the debt?
We didn't.
We didn't? So they still owe us $100 million?
No, it's all paid back.
Yeah, they can pay us back.
What happened was the United States went from being the world's creditor in 1946 to being the world's debtor by 1957. So it took a very short period of time before the U.S. was actually borrowing a tremendous amount of money.
So we just have to give away money that we don't have to get.
So anyway, people have a lot of money and they're going to start buying cars like these.
Didn't Bootlegger invent the race car?
I'm pretty sure I could.
What this Buick Centurion, this top one in the red, what does it look like?
A spacecraft.
It looks
Not
like a
very
spacecraft.
aerodynamic.
Why do you suppose it would look like a spacecraft?
Because it's futuristic.
Because hipsters.
Because everyone was obsessed with outer space in the 1950s. These are the first set of astronauts in 1959, right? And so there is this what? Louis Armstrong?
Yeah, that's I love Louis Armstrong. My head wide.
Yeah, but not to be confused with the other Armstrong. So there is this interest in outer space, and people want their cars to look futuristic and spacecraft like.
So everyone that couldn't actually get that can just drive.
What's that?
Did they charge more for those cars?
Oh, these cars have no fuel efficiency at all. They're giant hunks of metal. They weigh a lot. And the thing about really heavy cars is you need to put big motors in them in order to move them.
They didn't have those.
And so you also have these really big motors that are not very efficient, and they're moving 2,000 pounds of metal along the road and a few passengers.
Did you have to crank the windows?
What did you need? Tune-ups every what? 5,000 miles?
What's that?
You need tune-ups every what? 5,000 miles or something?
That sounds about right.
No, those are the Flintstone cars.
So, before the highway system, how would you actually get across the country?
Drive to the field.
The Route 66 would be different.
Route 66, which takes us to Josh's reference to the class.
Cozy dog.
Huh?
Cozy dog.
Cozy dog?
They invented the corn dog. It's on Route 66.
Yes. No, I was thinking about a Cars movie.
Oh.
Yeah, where is
Radiator
that?
Springs.
Did you know? Shh. Did you know that Radiator Springs is an actual place?
What?
It's not called Radiator Springs.
Isn't it like cars don't
Oh,
actually
like,
headlights?
It's Kingsman, Arizona. And they actually have a car museum there, which predates the movie Car.
I watched the documentary.
It sits right on, it sits on Route 66. Do you know what's at the front and back end of Route 66?
Is it Illinois?
It starts at the stairs of the Art Institute in Chicago. And it ends in Los Angeles at the Pacific Coast Highway.
That's a big road.
That's a really long road. I have been to both ends of it and some places in between. I've never done the whole thing. That was crazy.
Why?
Why?
Because it would take a really long time.
How long?
A really long time.
How fast?
Right now, getting across, let's see, if you wanted to go north, you wanted to say go Chicago to Seattle. It would take you 37 hours.
Is that on the
That's on
interstate
the interstate.
or the,
That's on the interstate.
what's the
If
speed
you were
limit
to
on
take,
56, 55?
if you were to go on Route 66, which is essentially a side road now, I figure you have to increase that by at least another half,
Yeah.
at least.
Amstud Class.
Oh, yes, because it goes to the towns. Yeah. You don't need that once you have the interstate highway system. And here's the other question, and it goes to my question about where people are living. If you were living in a city at the time the highway system was built, what might you think about if you were, say, a mayor in the cities in the 1950s and Eisenhower has proposed this interstate highway system? What might you think about the interstate highway?
I'd be mad.
Why?
Your tourists would go down.
The what?
The tourists,
Why do you think that?
because they would just be driving past and not through it.
Yeah, but wouldn't it increase? You can get more people coming into the city because it's easier to get.
No, not the little cities that the highways go through.
Yeah.
The interstates would just drive past.
Oh, so the small cities.
The small cities,
Yeah. Disappear.
like Radiator Springs.
Yeah,
Like Radiator
sad. No one knows what it is.
Exactly.
Is that why Aurora is Amsterdam?
No idea would go to the Cozy Cone.
So the promotion that comes from the government is, one, we need to be able to move military equipment, but two, if you're the mayor of, say, Chicago, don't worry. More people are going to be able to come and visit now because these highways are going to be make it more accessible to get into the city.
For big cities. Wait, when they built the interstates, did they build all the exits that they have now, or they have to add it?
No, they're always adding them. Look what they did to Route 59 and made it. What a mess. It took them like 20 years to do that.
What they do?
Are any of you from neighborhood?
No.
No, I have a whole classroom of students.
So crazy.
No one's from
Half the
neighborhood.
schools from
I'm by Lockport, which is.
What? It's incredible, not students, single student from
That's
neighborhood.
actually like
I live in North Aurora.
That seems like statistically impossible.
I'm like,
Well,
yeah, it's
very
like,
diverse.
Anyway,
I live like 2 minutes away.
this classroom is suddenly very diverse because there's no one from neighborhood. Route 59, which is the exit off of 88 to Kazoo there, they started that project before most of you were probably born, and they just finished it last year.
That's like 16.
Incredible.
Wait, what is it?
They actually flipped they redid the exits, and they flipped the directions of the lanes. So the people who want to go on or off the highway are now driving on the left side.
Why
of
would
the
they
road.
want to do that? Why wouldn't they just build a ramp that goes over it?
I have all kinds of questions about the idea.
Wouldn't that be
behind
easier?
it. I can't tell you, but so this was the promotion was that people will go into the city, and instead, the thing about building roads for people to get into the city is also makes it easier for people to get out of the city. Hence, Buffalo Grove. What were the other towns?
Springfield.
Not Springfield. Huh? Schaumburg.
Batavia.
Places that didn't have downtowns, where it had no accessibility because it wasn't on a train line, and so it doesn't date back to the 19th century. suddenly people can actually use the highways and they can access these places in the ways that they couldn't before. Hence, we get the suburbs. And the thing about building suburbia is that it's a condition, right? Suburbia. The thing about building suburbia, what? There's something else in the title though. It's like so-and-so of suburbia. The thing about the suburban culture is, doesn't it then fuel the need for more cars? Right? You start building it, now it's accessible, but now in order for people to get it anywhere, the suburbs are growing, so now you need to have a car. So what happens to the train lines? They disappear. This actually begins in the 1940s, but let me show you something else. Okay, graph. 1947. In 1947, the United States was the world's leading producer of oil. Think about that again. In 1947, the United States was the world's leading producer of oil. That's why
Who was the leading user?
the United States was also the world's leading consumer, which is why by 1948 it's no longer true. Then the world's leading oil producer was Saudi Arabia. Well, now some of that is the United States starts importing oil because there is such a demand in the U.S. for petroleum that domestic demand can't keep up with the domestic production. And we can also say, well, we're not going to really do that in this class, but we can say that means U.S. foreign policy with the Middle East gets its current form in 1947. That's when it's all going to start to change. Right? Because before that, who cares? We produce all of our own oil. And because of that oil range in North Dakota that I mentioned earlier, the United States is expected to become the world's leading oil producer once again by 2020. It will be short-lived, but there's a lot there. But look what happens once cars become a great source of mobility. And you'll also notice, this is here, 1975, the 1970s. Something happens in the 1970s. And the 1970s are really going to kind of shake the country's confidence in its ability when it comes to car culture.
The jetpack was invented.
No, OPEC was invented, actually.
For black.
Any of you know what OPEC is?
It's the oil producing economic countries or something like that?
Yes. They formed a cartel. What's a cartel?
Oh, drugs.
Okay, I know all of you think gang drug.
Gang.
But I assure you that the oil companies are not a drug. They're like a gang but involving business. Cartel is a kind of entity, but what's a cartel? They can produce drugs, they can produce oil. If you're science fiction fans, you read Frank Herbert, they can produce spices.
Spices like drugs.
None of you have read Dune, so never mind.
Wait, I saw
Have you seen the movie Dougal?
No. So, what's a cartel?
a black market business. Illegal business.
It's not illegal. There's nothing illegal about it.
They move it across borders.
I know it's kind of like a monopoly.
Do they only trade themselves?
Well, a drug cartel wouldn't just trade with themselves.
They trade with other people too.
They control the prices and stuff?
So they control all of the production but it's not a monopoly, it's a group, okay?
It's a vote
So think of a cartel as a monopoly that includes a bunch of different businesses that have all created a controlling entity. Okay? So the oil cartel or the oil producing countries decide they're going to control production. They're going to agree on how much they're going to produce. Therefore, they're also going to control supply and the price. The only thing they're not going to control is the demand.
So then is the diamond business a cartel?
Is what?
Diamond business?
Yeah.
You could argue that, in fact, it is. The thing, though, about the diamond business is that there's a whole lot of, I don't know how much you know about it, there's a whole lot of shady dealings going on at the bottom. The companies themselves are actually, the companies themselves might be a cartel. The actual supply of the diamonds is coming from all these really seedy characters who are the equivalent of like drug dealers on the ground. Right? So what you have is, imagine an analogy where you have drug suppliers who are legally producing their drugs, but then the actual distribution is controlled by a cartel. Now you have the diamond industry. OPEC, these oil producing countries, they form this cartel, right? They're going to control all of the world's supply. They, well, except for the US, right, which is still producing some. In 1968, they formed this group, and they decide they're going to control everything. And in 1973, they decide that actually it's the end of 1972, they decide they're going to flex their muscles. So they've been in existence for 4 years, and they decide that since they're all Arab countries and they disagree with U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, they're going to see if they can use their position in the marketplace to flex their political muscle. And they do this by basically cutting off the United States and say, we're not supplying you with any oil.
What year was it?
1973. January of 1973. Well, it's the end of 72, early 1973. They cut off the American supply of oil. Well, what does that do? If I go here,
It makes us mad.
they just cut the amount of oil,
We start producing a lot more.
but we can't.
We have a problem.
Throughout the 1970s, there will be discussion about what we actually do. The fact is, the country is up against a wall. Demand is incredibly high, but the supply has now been cut off. The result? Rationing. They have the country starts having what's called a strategic oil reserve, and they hold on to this for the purposes of the military having access to oil that's held, but never put on the market.
Is that why they invented the carpool lane?
Carpool lanes would have dated from the 1970s, in fact, during this crisis. And the other thing that's going to result is people realize that their cars are incredibly inefficient. And, you know, if their cars weren't so big, guzzling so much gas, if they had smaller cars, then when the rationing comes around to them and they fill up their tank, it would last longer if they had smaller cars. Guess who wasn't producing any small cars?
B&B.
The United States. All of the small cars were from other countries. So suddenly all of these foreign car manufacturers are getting into the U.S. market in the 1970s because they have the efficient cars. But the U.S. never needed efficient cars. What's the point? We have plentiful supplies of oil. Who cares if our cars are getting 6 miles per gallon? Which is true. The only place you can find a car that gets gas mileage that bad now is if you are in the market to buy a Lamborghini. Which I was guessing most of you are not.
Or a Bugatti Veyron.
What's that?
Bugatti Veyron, the fastest Bugatti Veyron runs out of this fuel in like 15 seconds. Or like 30 seconds.
Good to know. I'm going to say
Yeah, when you go buy it.
what we need to do is convince IMSA that they need to buy one so we have one to demonstrate.
Testing on the
It's
track.
the fastest street legal, one of the fastest street legal cars. It goes like 280 miles an hour.
Right after we get a budget. Or we can maybe get the company to sponsor a new lab and then donate.
Right after we get like Sodexo Gold instead of.
They cost like millions.
Hey, so this is pretty.
Oh, I know how we can do it. All of you can just give up lunch for like the next 3 years and then we'll have enough money.
I mean, we're not
I
really
can
giving
still do
anything up.
that, actually.
Oh.
As long as we have grab and go.
Boycott.
And so why didn't we produce? Wait, why couldn't we produce oil?
So we simply didn't have the capacity to produce that much.
Why not?
Right, we didn't have that many reserves. Like the Bakken oil range in North Dakota, we didn't have the technology to even extract it back.
So wait, who cut off the supply of oil?
All of the oil producing nations, the OPEC countries who were members of this cartel. They did that because they were upset with the United States Middle East policy. This is the situation everywhere. People just simply can't get the gas that they need. They start carpooling because they have to. They start carpool lanes as an incentive, and small car manufacturers start getting into the market. Nixon, who was president at this time, is forced to take action, and he and his national his Secretary of State Kissinger decide they're going to threaten the OPEC nations with invasion. They actually get the military on high alert, and they start moving aircraft carriers into position off the coast of the OPEC nations.
How'd that turn out for us?
And they said, and all they needed to do was get one of them to crack, and they figure if they get one of them to retreat, and then the other ones to follow. Well, it worked. The threat of invasion was enough to get one of them to back off, and then the other ones back off, and then.
What were the other world leaders saying about this?
Well, they weren't the target. Obviously, the U.S. was the target of the embargo.
Weren't they? Didn't they think that we were like bullying our way?
I think.
Well, I mean, yeah, but
other
countries can say that's a lie.
It's a good question because I don't really know. But if it follows other patterns, NATO would have been perfectly supportive. They would say, well, this is essentially kind of cutting off supplies like that is an act of war against the United States, therefore we will back whatever they decide to do. But I'm not actually familiar with what allies did.
Is that what Trump's doing in North Korea? They're trying to get them in.
That's slightly different because there isn't it's not an embargo. But it is very similar if you were to look at nuclear proliferation, so countries getting nuclear weapons. What we're seeing with the U.S. and North Korea, and basically in the case of North Korea, it's lasted longer than other countries. But the trend is generally the same. With one, well, no, here's the way it differs actually. Normally there's this initial kind of, look, you don't give nuclear weapons, and then you get into negotiations with them and you talk them down from having it. You offer them incentives. What can we give you that will prevent you from having this nuclear program and get you to sign on to the international agreement that the IAEA comes and inspects and makes sure that you don't have weapons? And all of the other countries,
how can the IAEA?
Why would we do that instead of just?
that's the International Atomic Energy.
So they just like scan for like nukes in the country? Like how do they?
The country signs the treaty and agrees to inspections and to spy satellites and all these things, making sure that they don't have them. And in return for giving up those nukes, they get a bunch of other things.
Why do
Good
that instead
trade
of
deals.
just pressure?
What's that?
Why do that instead of just if the pressuring works? Why do that and then you don't have to give them?
Yeah, here's do what?
Pressure cooking.
We don't have to give them all these benefits. We just pressure them and
The problem is they have nukes.
Yeah.
If you park your ships off the coast, like for instance, if we decide that we don't mind like South Korea never existing again,
right.
and I'm guessing a bunch of you probably don't want that, then you can go ahead and provoke the North Korea all you want. Because I guarantee as soon as you provoke them far enough, they will simply destroy South Korea.
Yeah, but we just sent something like anti-missile stuff on it. Or if that's what
We
Congress
did just do that, but again, do you really want to provoke a situation where North Korea is actually launching nuclear weapons into the air?
It's not like they have thermite.
What's that?
It's not like they have thermite.
Well, actually, no one really knows. At the recent parade last month, they did bring out intercontinental ballistic missiles, and what we don't know is if they would actually work.
ICBMs are big and slow, and won't be able to tell it as soon as they launch it.
remind me to never elect you president, okay? Because I don't want you to have access to the possibility of like provoking me. What has happened everywhere else is that people have gone into these agreements. Anyway, in the case of OPEC, there wasn't any actual threat other than that they had cut off the supplies. Nixon decides he's going to play a game of chicken. Was he actually prepared to invade these countries? I have no idea. Nixon, though, was just psychotic enough to keep people guessing. And it's true. I mean, they intentionally tried to create this image that you can't really trust Nixon. You never know what he's going to do. He's a loose cannon. And therefore, do you really want to provoke him? That's basically the game that North Korea plays with the rest of the world. And so they back off, and this comes to an end. Now, it doesn't finish the crisis. In fact, there's another one in 1979, which involves a different incident. But again, there is this energy crisis, which is going to provoke, soul searching. What do we do? It turns out that what do we do does not lead to the railroads coming back, which is, again, the source of the question I'm going to ask you to explore over the next couple of weeks, which is, so why not railroads? And if we really wanted to advocate for railroads, what would we need to do? And it's no small thing if you put it in terms of like CO2 emissions, and you look at the amount of CO2 emissions being emitted by passenger vehicles on a daily basis. And Americans also have the habit, not only do we like our cars a lot, 75% of American drivers are driving by themselves. I drive by myself to and from work, although I try to buy an efficient car. But I'm still driving by myself. And it turns out that not only are 75% of Americans driving by themselves, a lot of them are also driving big distances to get to work. Because the thing about the highway system is, do you know how many people from out here actually commute all the way into the city? And not by train? It's a lot. I mean, it's like 100 miles a day, 50 each way. But there are people who do it. The train is easier. Hence, people buying their property near trains. The only property in the whole country during the recession that doesn't actually lose value. It's the one thing that people wanted was access to public transportation. What's that? Do you have any other questions, maybe about papers or anything like that?
Oh.
Yeah.
What's the revision?
So in Power School, there's a revision option. After you turn in this paper, I'll tell you about it next week. You have a chance to pick up extra credit for revisions on any of the papers.
Even the third?
Even the third, if I get to it before then, which I do try to. Sometimes I get, like 75% of the papers will be done by the time that is due.
About the time that president was giving the women's vote and stuff like that, it was conservation trying to do that. Were there a lot of conservationists trying to rally up against the women's vote?
No, I don't know that there's any relationship at all.
They were just more
I love it. I actually did them and I looked up how theoretically you could drive the entirety of Route 66 in 6.5 hours. And that's like if you completely tore up the road. Because like it was like 2,000 something miles long, and then the fastest car in the world, and it's like top speed is like 380 miles per hour. So I divided those two, and it was like